Well, Reg, I'll come and sit down by you. Set the control. Can you tell me about, first of all, you were just saying then that you had a special philosophy about that, you were saying?
It's quite simple, actually. Last night we had a little gathering of middle-aged men, and if I might be so cruel, being rather ridiculous. But the person I'm here to talk about is that one. It was a young lad over the events of the period, of course, started at the age of 17 and went through to 24. So I'm speaking on his behalf, really. In other words, I'm an entirely different person to what I was, and anything I say seems completely remote. I'm talking about somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
So I was only looking round at the youngsters, the members of your company last night, and thinking that if you could put them in uniform, they're the people we're talking about, really. That age, those sort of aspirations and their reactions. Not a crowd of middle-aged men thinning on top and trying to cast the mind back to the minor orgies and various other things that they went through. So everything's in retrospect is sort of nothing to do with me. I'm talking about something in somebody else.
How do you feel you have altered then?
I think that my reactions are a lot duller altogether. I can remember the scents that I could smell when I was that age. That's incredible but true. My reactions are a lot keener, and I was far more observant. I was virtually a village boy. Pankow is a village, and Stoke's a bit of a backwater. So that as an existence, it was more or less my world. Well, I was booted rather rudely out of that into a very violent, entirely different, foreign, colourful and dangerous world at a very impressionable age, which is why I think that it's made such an impression on me and stayed with me.
Do you remember what you felt like when you were called up?
I wasn't called up, I volunteered. I was a territorial, and there's no great heroics in that. I was 17, but anybody with half an eye could see that war was coming, and I just didn't want to go out to war with perhaps a month's rifle training and marching drill. I wanted to be as prepared as I could could be under the circumstances, and I volunteered and picked my own unit, as it were. The artillery, of course. But, if you're wondering what I'm screwing up here, it's the story behind this. But
when was your first experience of actual, of what it did mean? And what I'm getting at is, I mean, did you go to war eagerly then?
With youthful enthusiasm, I think. I felt rather like a torchbearer. I was going to be in the front line. I was in the front rank. It was the forces of light versus the forces of evil, because we'd been brainwashed into Germans 9 feet tall that ate little babies for breakfast and speared them on the bayonets and fried them over open fires. Although that's a colourful description, that's the sort of thing that was running through our heads at the age of 17.
You believe that?
Not that as such, but to that degree, definitely, because we'd heard about the atrocities, the bombing of Warsaw, well, of course the invasion of Poland triggered it off, but Czechoslovakia, as far as we were concerned, we were only getting the black picture, which pushed us more and more into deepest depression, and we thought, well, at least we'd better find out how to fire a rifle, because it's coming as sure as God made little apples. And it did. If you've ever seen kids playing cowboys and Indians, I think that's the way I went to war. It was a game. We were laying our lives on the line and we didn't care. It was a game. It's just the same as you pretend to lay your lives on the line when you're playing cowboys and Indians. And although I was 17, passably intelligent and educated, I suppose, I was just a little boy playing at it.
Wait, how old were you when you actually went onto the posting you know was going to be a combat posting?
I was 19.
Mm-hmm. And that was to where?
Well, we were originally sent up the desert.
Mm-hmm.
We went to Camp Bani Yusuf, and if you want the impression of that, well, Egypt on the postcard is marvellous. Brilliant sunshine, interesting monuments. One thing postcards don't show you, the smells,
Mm-hmm.
and they're primitive to say the least. They also don't show you the size and quantity of the flies and various other little creeping annoyances.
Mm-hmm.
And that I knew was going to be a combat unit, but while we were there, the Italians invaded Greece, and our regiment was immediately embarked, and we went on the cruiser Ajax, by the way, which is another thrill for me, because the Ajax was only just fresh out of the news from the Battle of the Plate, and we didn't even know we were on the Ajax until we saw the honours board on the poop deck, is it? Quarter deck?
Mm.
And two of the batteries, it's a 3-battery regiment, 2 of the batteries went to Greece, and my battery was landed on Crete, and it was all Russian scramble, all real hectic stuff, you know.
Can I ask you when you knew, when did you arrive in Africa?
When? You want an actual date, do you?
Well, was it early in 1940 or 44?
It was 1940. It was at the end of the year, because I think it was the roughest weather that Africa has. It's October,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember we ran into some very heavy seas. We were on the line of Dominion Monarch,
Mm-hmm.
and it's a fair-sized boat. Britannic was in front of us, and the seas were so violent that it smashed a fantastic amount of crockery, men were injured, and furniture was roaming. So it was the end of the year, rough weather. Yes, October. We had the usual hectic few days in Cape Town, where we had a red carpet treatment. I've never been treated like a conquering hero before. I found out why when we ran into the Germans, of course, but and up to then it was a sort of bonus to the excitement of the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And we got bombed in the Red Sea by the Italians, which is a queer place to get bombed, but we're very close to Italian Somaliland when you're going through the Red Sea.
Was that your first taste of real, of real warfare, being attacked by an aircraft?
And that was, no. Of course, I'd been on the Lincolnshire coast in the steelworks on anti-aircraft, and we'd been bombed there.
Mm-hmm.
We'd been in action with some prehistoric naval guns there.
Mm-hmm.
But
The moment when you got into those situations, did it in any way qualify your youthful attitudes?
Not in the least, because I felt nothing so much as I was part of a great game, and I'd always fancied myself as a knight in shining armour, and this was my chance, even though it was khaki.
Mm-hmm.
And to me it was just a continuation. It was the game being fulfilled. Bombs dropped, they didn't hit me. Fires were started, odd shell splinters whistled through the air and so on, but nothing touched me personally. I felt invulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And the game went on. The faces were bright and eager, the language was confident and very much as you'd expect in those situations if you were just playing at it. And it didn't touch me, if you know what I mean. It was still part of the game.
Mm-hmm.
I was still being fed, I was still getting my sleep at night, I was well clothed, I was even being paid for it.
And then you landed in Crete. Oh, sorry, when you were about to land, when you got to Africa, did you see any action in Africa at all, or in Egypt, or you went straight to Crete?
No, the action in Africa was confined, I think, to the time the taxi overturned in front of us and went into the Suez Canal, I believe, and drowned most of the occupants. We thought that was quite an item. But they were all drunk at the time.
Now, you landed in Crete, and you went into action in Crete against the Germans. And as a result of that, you were captured. Can you tell me about? Can you tell me again, as if you hadn't told me the other night, about that action, particularly being captured?
Well, Crete, I was very familiar with because I'd already been on the island about 8 months before the Germans really hit it, before they invaded it.
What was the date of their invasion?
It was the 28th of May. The end of May.
1941, was it that one?
Yes.
No, that's in your book, I expect.
Well, it isn't even my book. It's a German book. Anyway, it was towards the end of May. Now, May on Crete isn't like May in England. It means tropical kit. And we were wearing pith helmets, shorts, khaki drill, and it was anti-mosquito cream in the evenings and all that sort of stuff, so it was really hot. 20th. Well, the action had been building up over a considerable period because obviously we were a target in as much as we were between the Italian, Greek mainlands and the Dodecanese Islands, which were Italian held. We were the sort of last stepping stone to Africa, and pressure had been building up, and then bombing raids which built up in frequency, and they also built up in intensity.
This is after Rommel has done his big advance. They've just captured Frankenbill. Rommel started in February 1941, didn't he? And his big advance was in May.
That's right. That's right. The news was
sorry,
bad.
in April. In April, he really moved forward.
Yes, the news was bad from Africa, but we'd got troubles of our own. We had 2 batteries of men in Greece, and of course we knew exactly what was happening, because when the Germans pushed them right down to the end of the peninsula, they evacuated what was left, and they were brought back to Crete. Well, they were coming back in anything and everything, destroyers. Remember, it's one heck of a journey, must be a couple of 100 miles, and some of them were making it in rowing boats. And out of the 2 batteries, which must have comprised about 250, 300 men, we got 40 back on Crete, and without any official figures, I haven't a clue what happened to the rest, but very, very few got back to Egypt. So we were getting all sorts of tattered remnants of units back on Crete. Well, it sounds as though they were reinforcing the garrison, because the garrison on Crete was roughly about 9,000. We ended up with something like 20,000, but they'd got no arms, very little in the way of supplies, only what they wore, which was normally in rags anyway, and we even gave up half our blankets and, well, rations to keep them on the above the starvation line. They were living just under the trees on Crete, so that there was a pretty high concentration of manpower on Crete, but in actual fact they were a nuisance as far as the garrison was concerned. We were the garrison, because they were in the way, they were an embarrassment, and when it came to the push, they were under our feet. I was on a mobile light anti-aircraft gun, a Bofor quick firer, and our particular beat was a patrol up and down a headland. We were mobile, remember, and they towed this Boffer gun at various sites during the day.
Was this headland promontory into Suda Bay?
Yes, it was north of Suda Bay, and our patrol was up and down this headland, and we shifted the site every day to go into action, and as I say, the action was intensifying until on the morning that the invasion hit the island, I had been detailed to go on a funeral party, burial party, for one of our men that had been killed at the other end of the island, Malamy Aerodrome. And I'd been taken back on the ration wagon to headquarters, ready to go on this burial party the following day. And well, the concert opened up in the morning. We used to go to the morning concert, but it was the bombardment, and
where were you bombarded from? The sea?
Oh no, dive bombers.
Oh, I see.
It was regular clockwork. The Germans were nothing if not reliable when it came to time. And they used to start about an hour after dawn, and they used to carry on to just about sunset, and then they'd quite calmly pack up and go home.
Was it Stukas?
Well, Dorniers, Stukas, with accompanying Messerschmitt fighters. And I woke up in headquarters, lying on the floorboards there, and I thought, well, this is a pretty heavy one. And it was a very heavy bombardment, and they were after the town. Well, we were in the town.
Which town?
Kinnear. We were in the town, but it was on the outskirts of the town, and of course nobody came to, wagon came to take us on the burial party, so we sort of got out and found out that the bombardment was pretty intensive, and machine gunning started then. The bombardment eased off, and the accompanying fighters started the cannon fire and machine gun fire. Well, when the windows started to go in, we all dived for the slit trench in the garden of the house, and we were there for about an hour. And it didn't let up at all, and then the sergeant major on headquarters, battery headquarters, he asked for a volunteer to fetch ammunition from troop headquarters, which was about a couple of blocks away, further towards the outskirts of the town. Well, always having been the first to leap into action, I volunteered, and I wondered why nobody else volunteered, but one bloke was detailed to go with me, and I couldn't for the life of me understand why I was creeping along the street from gateway to gateway.
Well, he was, or you were?
He was. I was as green as grass. But to me,
still cowboys?
It was still a game, cowboys and Indians. And we got to the top of the street. Bullets were whistling, but as I say, I felt invulnerable. Nothing was going to touch me. This only happened to other people. And we got to the corner, and he disappeared completely, so I continued to troop headquarters on my own. In the meantime, down the road from headquarters, troop headquarters, where we were heading, on my own now, there came two men propping up, one between them, and well, his face was a mask of blood. It was just streaming down his face. You couldn't see his face, it was just streamers of blood. And apparently he got a couple of bullets right through his steel helmet into his head, you see. Well, he was carting him off to the station, and when I asked what had happened, they said, oh, the snipers just outside headquarters. So I was a bit more cautious from then on, but I still wasn't frightened. Now you can believe this if you like, I wasn't frightened, it was still a game. I got to headquarters, battered on the door, and couldn't get in. They'd barricaded it, and when I shouted who it was and what I wanted, because there were voices behind, the door opened about 2 inches and a rifle muzzle came out. And for Christ's sake, if you come in, come in. Be snappy about it. So I heard rumbling and grunts as the furniture was moved. I dived in. The ammunition and supplies were in another building at the bottom of the garden. The quartermaster sergeant was there, and he said, if you want any stuff, go and fetch it yourself. Well, that should have been a clue to me. because in the army you get nothing unless you sign in triplicate, and then you've got to explain exactly what you want it for. So I went, climbed over another barricade by the back door, went down the garden path about 20 yards into this building, which was open, and helped myself to ammunition. Oh, and boy's anti-tank rifle. And came back again. All the while there's hammering and banging going on outside. Well, if you can understand it, there was a garden wall. It was a house, with a building, the house at one end, the building at the other end, and about a 6-foot garden wall all the way down. Beyond that there was open space, fields. And I got back into the building, and the first thing I was greeted with, "So you made it then? We didn't think we'd see you again." Of course I made it. I went down the garden and back. You know where the bloody sniper is? He's just the other side of that garden wall. He said if you'd have shouted or made a noise, you'd had a grenade over the wall. Of course I turned several different shades of green, but I did get the ammunition back to battery headquarters. But I was a lot more careful on the way back, and found out that we were got to move into troop headquarters anyway, because they were determined to beat off the snipers. The snipers turned out to be a glider. It was an 11-man glider that crash landed right outside troop headquarters in the field. It had turned upside down and killed about half of the Germans inside, but the others were still out. Most of them, about 2 or 3 of them had been killed, but there were a couple of them still under cover and using the Tommy guns opening up. They'd already killed 2 of our men in troop headquarters, which is hence the barricades and all the precautions. And I was sent up to the well, more of a square-topped roof. It looked like a tower. Well, it was the upper story of this house, which overlooked the glider, and I was sent up there with this boy's anti-tank rifle. And I got up there just in time to see the last of the snipers killed. It was a Greek who did a bayonet charge. I've never seen anything like it. Still.
What do you mean?
Well, he charged for about 100 yards over open ground, and nothing hit him, or if it did, he didn't feel it. It certainly didn't stop him.
And he killed the German?
And he just bayoneted this German. We found out afterwards he'd even got a round up the spout, but he hadn't fired. He just charged and bayoneted this German. And this German was hiding behind the wing of the overturned glider. He'd seen him, but we couldn't. All we knew was that he was spraying bullets around. But I got up just in time to see that. The other thing that I saw while I was up there was the virtual annihilation of the Dover's heavy battery. It was a 3.7 anti-aircraft battery, and it was about 200 yards from our headquarters. And the Germans had landed all around that. You can see how close they were to the town and us, and they landed all the way around us. There's 4 of them, I think. So they'd surrounded this battery, which of course, apart from the guns, had got very few small arms, and therefore they were virtually helpless with the Germans so close. And I heard a lot of machine gunning. The battery was silent. I heard a lot of machine gunning, and I saw the Germans running to a house beyond the battery. And it turned out later that they just lined the gunners up of the battery and shot them into their own slit trenches. Well, I was then ordered to open fire on this house that the Germans had taken cover in. Well, I did. A boy's anti-tank rifle is a ferocious weapon, absolutely out of date. It fired a 1-inch bullet and it's got a kick like a mule. Well, I was firing that from the shoulder, and you're supposed to, well, it's a technical stuff, but I fired it anyway, and I fired 2 or 3 pans at this house. Whether I hit anything or anybody, I've not the slightest idea, but I saw 1 or 2 windows go in and 1 or 2 tiles fly off. But they were eventually mopped up by Marines who moved in, and they attacked in the normal way and finished off with a bayonet charge. Well, even then it was still a game. Nothing was going to touch me. I'd gone through it all. I'd gone through snipers, shell fire, machine guns from the air, and even the glider attack and so on. Nothing was going to touch me. I felt invulnerable. And that feeling stayed with me. Well, of course, there's a heck of a lot between there and when I was captured. Just depends what you want to
When did you lose
use.
it? The feeling.
Well, I know exactly when. I'll never forget it.
Tell me about that.
We were in the prison camp. Camp on that island was just a barbed wire cage, although it wasn't a cage in that sense of the term. It was just barbed wire entanglement all around an area, and we were just dumped in it. We slept in hollows, under trees, anywhere. But at the north end of it there was a road, and the barbed wire ran within about 10-15 yards of the road. There was one or two small buildings, sort of farm buildings, perhaps they were workmen's huts or something along this road. And I was at that fence one day when I saw two Germans go to one of these small huts. It was no bigger than the average English coal place. And they dragged out of it a big burly man, 20, 25, somewhere in that region. He was a full-grown, husky type bloke. They dragged him out and they beat him over the head and back, all the way up the road to the German headquarters. What happened to him after that I don't know, but I've never forgotten the feeling when I saw. I've seen kids fight, I've seen drunken men fight, I've seen soldiers fight amongst themselves on a Saturday night after they've been paid. But the cold beating, the brutality of a man that can just carry a stick and casually beat somebody up the road, shouting German obscenities at him all the way up the road, just to teach him who's who and what he could expect, and, well, pure degradation. That was the first time that I ever felt the absolute reality of the situation, and from there on it never left me. Up till then it had been a game.
Tell me about when you were captured.
It was still a game then. I never felt such a fool in my life. I'd been on the run. There'd been bodies, there'd been killings, there'd been noise, God knows what noise. I've still got bad ears from the noise, and they've never been the same since. I mean, bombing is bombing, whichever way you look at it. And you can't hear it, it's so loud, you feel it, and it does things to you. I don't pretend I was a hero. I was terrified, but I was terrified in a way that a kid's terrified, but in a dream, but he expects to wake up from it. It's real at the time, but as soon as it stops, everything's all right again. You forget that quickly. That's the feeling I'd got. It was still a game. Oh heck. When you start me off like this, memories come rushing back. That's why I've always thought to myself, if I don't speak at all, I'm boring nobody. If I start, I can't stop. I warned you, I was young, I was impressionable, and I picked things up easily then, and it stuck with me.
Anyway, you've been on the run.
What do you want? The events leading up to me capture, or how I felt when I was captured?
Well, yes, both. Just describe. You'd been on the run, and you're about the events leading up to it briefly.
Well, first of all, I deserted. I was left in Seoul. Can I come back to a little bit on that? I'd been in the town in Kinnear, and I'd had enough. I knew that every day they were going to have something like 6 to 8 hours continuous bombing and machine gunning. I'd been in town. Then I was sent back on my own gun on the peninsula, on the Akrotiri Peninsula. And to me, although it was action, it was a haven of rest, because at least I was in the open, I could see the danger, I could take shelter from it, or I could hit back. In town you can't. I hate being in town, at a town like that, because buildings tend to fall on you. Even if the bomb hasn't hit you, the building will. Glass will fly. Even if a shell splinter doesn't hit you, glass will. I absolutely hated being in the town. I felt trapped. So I was in my element when I was back out on the peninsula. Then I'd only been back the one day. We'd seen action. I believe we shot one down that day as well. And the Donner dispatch rider came up to say that we were ordered to move into town. We were going to form a line to form a line of resistance to hold the town. And remember, they were Bofors, although they're anti-aircraft, they would fire horizontally and could be used for anti-tank. And 19, I'd made my mind up I wasn't damn well going to. It was pitch dark, we were out in the open, remember, and with no lights, you loaded everything by touch and instinct. We loaded the gun, we hitched the gun up, we loaded the ammunition up, we loaded the stores up onto the tractor, which of course was one of these six-wheeled Morris vehicles. We then threw our own personal kit onto the lorry, kit bags and so on, and in the dark I climbed on the lorry and I deliberately threw my kit off again, because I knew nobody would see me, they wouldn't miss me until they got to the other end. An amazing thing happened. The sergeant started counting heads in the dark, called me, and he said, "I want you to stay behind to look after the stores we can't take." Well, that's when I first started believing in some sort of special divinity that was going to protect me from anything and everything. And the game was on again. Well, I didn't stop to argue, and I watched them drive off into the night, but I would have deserted then, there's not the slightest doubt about it.
What would you have done?
I would not have gone back to town. Well, I knew the hills, I'd been there 8 months. I knew the hills well enough to disappear. And I knew enough Greek to get around, to ask my way, ask for food, shelter or whatever. Although there were German paratroopers in the hills, I was going to take my chance against them sooner than the town. Anyway, they drove off into the night and I was left alone with the rifle, 50 rounds of ammunition and a whole heap of junk, tent and all sorts of stuff that a gun sub would have. Cooking stuff, 50-gallon barrel of water and various other things. And I was there on my very little own for 2 days. Nobody brought me anything, no rations, no food, no orders, no information. The only contact I had was a short distance away, perhaps a quarter of a mile, half a mile, were some anti-parachute infantry, the Northumberland Hussars. And I kept contact with them, and I was eating their food as well. Eventually they moved off, and I certainly wasn't going to stop there on my own, because remember there were German parachutists on the peninsula. And I went down to what I knew to be the nearest village, where I found battery headquarters, who'd pulled right back out of the town itself and gone to this village, the other side of town, away from the Germans. While I was in that village, I had some of the most hair-raising experiences I can ever remember. One, for instance, was that everything that moved, the Germans shot at or bombed, literally, even if it was only a towel on the line, or a dog crossing the street, or a goat tethered to a post in the field. And they were so low that you could fire at them with revolvers and have a fair chance of hitting them. They couldn't have been more than 20 feet up on some of the runs. Anyway, a big Alsatian dog that was terrified in the bombing of the village, and we were afraid that if it dashed outside it would draw attention to our particular house in the village, and the Germans were picking out individual yards, houses, windows even. They were picking individual things out and giving them a doing over. And I grabbed this dog, got under the kitchen sink and lay full length on top of the dog. And a bomb came down and blew the kitchen door in. And if I hadn't have been under the sink, it had broken my back. The door landed on the sink and split. Well, when the smoke and everything else cleared, the dog had disappeared. We found it about an hour later. It had been machine gunned. It wasn't more than 50 yards down the road, and it had been machine gunned. That was how intense the bombardment and attack was. We'd got a church just round the corner in the village, a very tiny place, so it was only a matter of 20, 30 yards, a little church, where all our wounded were. And that had been hit with a stick of bombs, and all the wounded were underneath the rubble, under hope and hell of clearing it or getting them out. We went down, I say we, of course there was probably half a dozen of us in headquarters. No officer, no, I think the highest rank there was a bombardier, 2 stripes. We went down below the village because it was a shambles, it was burning, it was smoking, everything was in bits. And, well, quite frankly, we just wanted to get the hell out of it. We found that the villagers had taken shelter in a cave underneath the hill. And this cave was so big that it got a door, like a barn door, onto it. And inside there were various ledges where the entire village had sort of made the home. Beds, tables, the lot, lights. And we stayed in there until sunset. And the villagers asked us to get out of it, because the Germans were advancing, and had they found uniformed soldiers there, it would have been pretty rough on them. I think I'm rambling.
No, leading up to the your capture now.
They said to us, if you want to get across the headland and through to Souda Bay, which is where our troops were still fighting, there's an underground tunnel. It's about 2.5 miles long, and it's years since anybody's ever used it, but we believe that the smugglers and so on of olden days used to use it, and we know that it goes through that way. So I said, not on your Nelly. And by this time we'd gathered 1 or 2 others, strays out of the front line that had lost the units, or they might even have deserted for all I know, but we picked up 1 or 2 others, an Aussie, a New Zealander, a few other odds and ends anyway. So there were about 20 of us. And it was sunset. We came out of the cave because the Germans packed in very methodically and accurately on the dot at sunset, and just the ground fighting was continuing. And the mortar fire was getting pretty close. Machine guns were now getting behind the hill where we were, so we were in mortal danger of being cut off. It was pitch black, and as the sun's rays were going down, we climbed up the hill. The idea was to go back into battery headquarters, pick up enough equipment to travel with, and beat it over the horizon. There was a line of us, 20 of us, and I was about the 4th or 5th in line. As the first 2 men breasted the crest of the hill, they were shot dead. There were German machine gunners in the village. I'm afraid we just left the men where they dropped and ran like hell. And we disappeared into the gathering gloom and started walking towards the Akrotiri Peninsula, where we knew we'd be cut off. The Akrotiri Peninsula, we've got a sort of narrow neck, and then Souda Bay came round there. Our troops were fighting on the other side of Souda Bay. We were on this peninsula. We walked God knows how long, but we were making our way down to the bay. The idea being that we found something that would float and got over the 2-mile stretch to the other side. We got as far as the bay itself and found a road which led round the marshlands, which brought us back to the other side. We walked down towards the marshlands and pitch dark. I remember stepping onto a dead body on the way. All squelchy, it's a peculiar sensation. And suddenly a parachute flare went up. And of course, they've got to be seen to be believed. You could photograph them by the light of a parachute flare, and all hell broke loose. the Germans had captured some of our guns on the neck of the bay, at the base of the bay, and there's a ding-dong battle going on. So we decided not to go that way, and we wended away back up the shoreline, and there was a lot of sunken shipping in the bay, and I volunteered to swim out and see if there was anything floatable on them, a raft, a lifeboat, anything that would float. I'd even got down to stripping my pants off ready for the swim, and I'm not much of a swimmer. About 50 yards was about my limit then, and I'd just about have made it to the ship. And I found out that they'd all decided to walk off anyway, so I followed them. We found a cave overlooking the bay, and just flopped down where we were and went to sleep. First thing I saw next morning was the daylight through the opening of the cave, and traffic going on the other side of the bay. And it didn't take us long to discover that all this traffic was German. So it was a waste of time trying to cross the bay because our troops had fallen back in the night. Went from there to the village, I believe it's the village of Akrotiri, on the Akrotiri Peninsula, which is on a rather rocky headland overlooking the very tip of the peninsula. I had my last meal there. It was Greek wine, it was loganberries, goat's milk cheese, and a little bit of rough bread. And the bloke that fed us apparently had been feeding blokes all day that had been going through our units, and they sort of gave us what he could and sort of waved us goodbye, and we made our way down to the beach. The beach, of course, being all rocky shingle stuff, not sand. And it was at 8 o'clock at night, just as the sun was beginning to sink, that we heard a shout from up on the ridge above us, and what looked like our troops up there. They're shouting down, "You're completely surrounded, throw down your arms and surrender." And the fellow next to me said, "That's a bloody Jerry in our uniform," and it was. He wasn't in our uniform, but he'd rolled his trousers up so it looked as though he was wearing shorts, and he got one of our pit helmets on, open neck shirt and all the rest, and he couldn't have told him from any of the other riff-raff that was making the way all unkempt and disorderly. He ups with his rifle to shoot him. Somebody knocks it out of his hand and said, "Do you realise what's going to happen? There's a ring of machine guns round there, and one rifle bullet knocking them off, and they'll open fire and sweep all this area." Well, nobody moved. We were all behind rocks in the undergrowth, and suddenly an unmistakable British voice, who turned out to be a British major, said, "You're wasting your time, lads. There's a complete regiment of them up here, and they've got, it's a tight as a bottle, bottleneck, with all corked up. Says, you better come up with your hands up." So gradually, in dribs and drabs, as he came from behind the boulders, and we sort of made our way up to this ledge. I never felt such a ruddy fool in my life. It was just play acting as far as I was concerned, and I just wouldn't lift my hands up. That was kid stuff, for playing. Why should I, full-grown man, walk along with my hands in the air when I wasn't going to do anything anyway? I was coming up regardless. So why the hell did he want my hands up? Everybody else got their hands stuck in the air, but I wouldn't. I couldn't have done, even if it had shot me. I felt such a fool. The German that I spoke of was an officer wearing our kit. And the first thing that I ever heard a German say was, "The stories you've heard about us are all lies. We do not shoot our prisoners." And they lined us up, put guards on us from the units that were overlooking this hill, and they marched us immediately to a graveyard. And I thought, oh, at first time, the first German lie I've caught him out, and he's going to massacre us all in this here graveyard, which is ideal for the job. Yeah. But of course he didn't. He they just posted guards on the corners of the graveyard with machine guns, and we slept amongst the tombstones that night. There was a Austrian there who was chatting in English, very good English, to us, and he said that it was all propaganda that they'd heard about the Germans. They were ordinary human beings like anybody else who only wished to get the war over and get back home. And he even gave me his home address and said, now, you'll be a prisoner in Germany. Food's pretty tight, but if you write to this address, then I'll write first and I'll tell them to send you some food. And well, it's all part of the game again. You know, their attitude was, you fought well, you've lost. It could have been us, but hard luck, you know. Their attitude was, you've done pretty well, good luck to you, mate. We'll look after you now. The war for you's over.
Did anybody say that to you? The war for you is over.
Oh, it was a favourite phrase. I don't know whether they thought they were giving us an Easter egg or what. But I remember one remark at the time. We hadn't seen one single British aircraft through 10 days of fighting.
Mm-hmm.
We'd seen nothing but black crosses and swastikas. And the first remark that anybody made was when another formation went over. We were under guard then, and one looked up and said, well, at least we've got the biggest and best air force in the world protecting us now, the Germans.
Mm.
Which at the time seemed very apt, because I suppose it was. Anyway, the war is over for you. It was, I'm afraid, a rather hackneyed phrase that the Germans were fond of, as though they were doing us a favour by saying the war was over for you. But of course it wasn't. It was only.
Did they feel they were? You get the impression that they felt they were doing you a favour.
They were the master race. This isn't just a phrase that somebody thought up. It's a thing they honestly believed in. They were superior beings. They were supermen. And by God, they very nearly proved it. Everything they'd set out to do up till then, they'd jolly well done, by hook or by crook, and nothing was stopping them. But
how did you think they got beaten in the end?
By sheer cussedness. The British, and I think it came out more clearly in the camps than anywhere else I've ever been, they're the most cussed race on earth. There's one failing they've got. They can be beaten, but they don't know they've been beaten, because they won't accept the fact. In a cockeyed way, they regard themselves as supermen without really knowing it, because they simply will not accept that anybody's better than them. And it's something psychological, I think. They know they've been beaten, all the evidence is there in front of them, but they can still laugh, joke and sneer about it with the people that have beaten them. Mm-hmm. And if I might make a comment here, I do my best to dodge domestic activity.
That's it. Right. Now, sorry, you were about to say.
My honest opinion about myself is that I was of far more use to the Allied war effort as a prisoner of war than I ever was as a British serving soldier. And whether or not that sounds ridiculous to you, I can prove it in a way. My fighting career as a soldier, out of 7 years of warfare, consisted of 10 days intensive fighting, apart from the few actions we had before then. But actual us versus them on the ground enemy, 10 days. Which sounds an expensive and long-winded way of winning a war. 7 years for 10 days. But as a prisoner of war, my contribution, I think, to the war effort consisted of, I was on a working party, remember, consisted of sabotage, quite seriously, sabotage, propaganda, because we never let the Germans forget that we'd got better stuff, we lived better, we were better, and we were going to win anyway. We never let up, every opportunity. And last but by no means least, example. There again, it may sound ridiculous, how can a prisoner of war set an example to not only his own guards, but the surrounding population? Sabotage. Well, we were working on the railway, and there are endless ways of sabotaging tools, equipment, the railroad itself, and so many ways that I could go on for ages giving you actual examples of what we did. Suffice it to say that there are stretches of railway between an area of 10 miles from the south of Berlin back to Berlin itself, not to mention other stretches around about Leipzig, which for years after the war finished must have been unsafe because the damage would not show for quite a while. It's technical stuff, but after a while, after a year or so working on the railways, we not only became first-class railway plate layers and various other types of things, we did everything: cementing, bridge building, station building, cuttings, embankments. Not only were we good railwaymen, but we became very crafty. We knew exactly what the job entailed and how far we could go. For instance, I was put on cleaning a rather king-size cement mixer because we were short of cement. We got a couple of days wait for the supplies to come through, and I was put on cleaning it. They gave me a hammer and they gave me a chisel and then left me to it. The idea was that I chipped all the solid cement off the various parts. Within a couple of days I'd managed to hammer off several nuts and bolts with the hammer and chisel. I'd damaged one or two pipes which constricted the flow of fuel to the diesel thing, and I'd done various other little things like that, and I'd emptied quite a few iron filings and cement powder mixtures into the fuel tank itself. Oh, it sounds dangerous because they obviously were going to find out when they tried to start the thing up, but the Germans weren't sufficiently interested in us to separate us one from the other. To them we were just faces and numbers, so that they wouldn't have picked me out and said, "Baker, you were on the cement mixer, therefore you're responsible." All they knew was it was a prisoner that had done it. And anyway, the damn thing didn't work for a week after. They had to strip it down and dismantle it and do it up again. We were cementing in winter on a bridge, and after we'd done a certain amount, they left us to the mixing, which was sand, cement and water. And we found out that if we put about 3 times as much sand into the mix and far more water, it was very weak cement anyway, and in the cold weather it just froze rapidly with water in. And another little trick was it got reinforced bars. Oh, the bars were something like 12 feet long, which you hooked onto previous bars in the foundations and then cemented up reinforced steel. They got a curl on. We used to chop the curl off the top and insert about 2 inches of reinforcing in a 10-foot length, so that when the guards or the gangers inspected, they see a row of hooks all set in cement, rapidly drying cement, but actually it was freezing, and it looked all right. Fortunately, we moved from that camp after 6 months, because, I say fortunately, because the whole bridge cracked and crumbled and had to be demolished. So I consider that things like that were valuable and useful.
What would have happened if they'd found out if you were all there when it had cracked and crumbled and demolished?
They blamed the foremen and gangers because it was their job to see we did the job.
Mhm.
But the foremen and gangers were Germans, and although they were efficient and thorough in their own job, they weren't really up to it when it came to handling perhaps 200 men prisoners. 200 men determined to do everything that they could
And
to
hide it.
damage it and keep it undercover. I mean, we were covering for one another all the time.
Tell me, you spoke at the beginning, Reg, about your bright dream, and you told me the moment when your sense of invulnerability left you, when you saw the man being beaten up. But what happened to the bright dream?
The bright dream, it was not so much a dream as a game. The game suddenly became reality, and it certainly embittered me. I felt pretty rotten because I'd known during the fighting some pretty horrible things. I'd seen some pretty horrible things, and yet they still hadn't touched me. And I became embittered to the extent that I saw everything in a new light. We were small parties underneath the olive groves, the same olive groves that had been a battleground only a few days before, and it was crawling with livestock, lice and various other interesting things, because there were still bodies just below the surface, and there was still blood in the earth and bits hanging from the trees. Anyway, you can get horrific stuff from any old soldier that's ever seen any action. But my impressions are what I'm trying to get over. That was still part of the adventure up to then, but from there on, life went a bit sour. Little things like blokes stealing from one another in the camps. You couldn't leave anything unguarded, and it was regarded as the same sort of thing that happens at school. If you lose your cap at high school, you do not complain about it, you go and pinch somebody else's, and they do the rounds like that. That's the sort of feeling I'd got up to then. After that, I suddenly saw things in the right light. So dog eat dog. The fight for food, the deliberate cheating over food, the complete disregard of other people's comfort or even necessities. I'd been guilty of it myself, I don't pretend I wasn't. But where before it had been all part of the game, suddenly it became a rather horrible nightmare, which wasn't a nightmare, it was reality, and I hated the whole human race. Now, whether or not, I suppose that was reaction from the thing I'd just seen, but it faded, but only gradually. It didn't really disappear. The reality of it always stayed with me, but the bitterness left me, and I can almost pinpoint that. After we'd been in the first camp for something like a month, we were taken from Crete itself, that camp, in the most appalling conditions on a Greek coaster up to Salonika, where we ran into a little bit more hell. But if it's my feelings you want, I mean, those are just incidents.
What was the hell?
On Crete, the Germans had found several of their paratroopers mutilated. They'd been nailed to barn doors and the privates cut off and stuffed in their mouths. But that type of thing, there were atrocities going on. But what had happened was they dropped their paratroopers all over the place, and in the outlying villages, the villagers themselves had cornered them and clobbered them. For instance, we shot down one plane, a dive bomber, and when we got there, of course we sent a couple of men out with rifles to see if there were any survivors and bring them back as prisoners. When we got, well, I say we, when they got there, they heard a screaming, and as they sort of came in full view of the wreck, they saw a Greek farmer, I suppose he was, who was busily clubbing the pilot to death with a sledgehammer. And the Greeks are, well, they're primitive in a lot of ways, and they're very fierce. They make wonderful friends, and they make bloody bad enemies. I should hate to really cross a Greek. I believe that we're not on very good terms with the Greeks at the moment, and I wouldn't like to go back under those circumstances, but they're wonderful friends.
So these mutilations were done by the villagers, you reckon? Not by our soldiers?
Now, the mutilations were definitely done by the villagers,
Mm-hmm.
but word had gone back to the Greek mainland and to the German people who went over the German radio that Churchill's gangsters were committing atrocities on Crete. So the daylight raids over the area were dropping leaflets. We shall not forget, we know about your behaviour, your atrocities, and you will be paid back in full for the injuries you've done to the German soldiers and so on. Your cause is lost, you are doomed men. Those were the leaflets they were dropping on us. But in actual fact, after a short while, the Germans found out that it wasn't us, it was the villagers. In the course of finding out, they actually wiped out one or two villages as reprisals. But by the time we were captured, the Germans themselves knew that it wasn't us. After all, we can go around nailing people to barn doors. So that the Germans had captured us. They weren't Germans. They were Austrians.
Mm-hmm.
Big, blonde, blue-eyed giants. In fact, Max Schmeling was one of them. And as I said...
Who's Max Schmeling?
Max Schmeling, world heavyweight champion German boxer.
Oh. You saw him, did you?
I saw him carried off in a stretcher. He was invalided out with dysentery. He wasn't wounded.
Mm-hmm.
And their attitude to us was, we played a game, it was a hard game, we won, hard luck, but you know, we were practically the best of pals under the circumstances. And yet, word had got back to the mainland that we were criminals. When we landed on the quay at Salonika, still boys, I was 19 going in 20, we had an escort. They were lining the quay right the way down to the main street of the town. Must have been a quarter of a mile. We went through a corridor of German SS troops, and each one got a Tommy gun cocked and at the ready. They'd been warned that we were highly dangerous, we were criminals. And we were only young kids. We were bewildered, we were tired, we were hungry, we'd got dysentery, we'd got life, we'd got everything. We were shambles. And yet, that we were regarded as the most dangerous things that, you know, to be handled with care. And the treatment was in proportion to their fear of us.
Mm-hmm.
And we went down this appalling corridor of hard-faced, vicious Germans who spit, kicked and hit us at every opportunity. And we marched off to the camp in Salonika, which I think I mentioned the other night anyway.
Mm.
From there, we went to, by train, a 4-day trip, and ended up in Berlin. Rather glossed over a pretty nightmarish journey, but that's it.
Well, you said that you can remember the moment when the bitterness went away. That's what we were getting to, actually.
Yes, the first few weeks in the camp was no different to what it had been on Crete. You didn't dare leave anything, you didn't dare turn your back on anything. It was dog eat dog, we used to steal from one another. It was terrible. And how the transition came about, I don't know, but I like to think that it was because of a fella that was going around the camps. He was a bit of a religious fanatic. He was Canadian. He was a sort of wandering folk singer who sang nothing with a guitar, who sang nothing but hymn tunes and tried to save his soul. But he was putting a lot of spade work in, and he was everlasting preaching, we must pull together. And once we got out on the working parties, which was about 3 weeks, I suppose, a month, and under this influence, I like to think, there was an amazing change. I've never known anything like it. From dog eat dog, it suddenly became, well, let's see what we can do for one another. For Christ's sake, leave his bread alone. Don't touch his boots and leave them socks. And we started working together. And from there on, the bitterness began to leave me. Now, it was pretty rough up to then. One bloke hung himself in the toilet. He couldn't stand it. It was pretty cold weather too, I remember. Anyway, we got more and more organised. We chose our own leaders. We went to them for everything. We held committees. We got escape committees. We organised and organised. We built a community within the camp.
This was in your German camps after you'd left Salonika, or did this
In the German
influence of
camps.
this Canadian start at Salonika? Or?
The influence didn't start at Salonika because I think we had one rather terrible example by somebody that should have known better. We were sort of ordered around on parade by a regimental sergeant major who was always calling us to attention, forming us in squads so the Germans could count us and giving us their instructions, you think, like where we were going to go, what we were going to do. Meal calls, inspections and so on. One night, two blokes went out of the barracks, which was inviting sudden death anyway, because they fired at anything that they moved after dark. And they got a long pole with a nail on the end, prodded it through the stores, the hole in the store's window, and speared a loaf and dragged it out, you see. They made some noise, and they were shot dead. They machine gunned from the posts. And the bodies were left there all night. We went on parade next day, and the bodies were still there. And the sergeant major, all brusque and smart and very efficient, said to us, I want you to have a good look at those carcasses over there and see if you can identify any of your friends. That's what happens to people that step out of line. Remember, that was an English sergeant major talking, so you can see the bitterness hadn't left me by then. But the bitterness did leave me when I suddenly found that we'd got a reserve of strength within ourselves that we could turn to. And by uniting, by pooling our resources, our little gimmicks to fall back on, our little humours, our little knowledge, our civic experiences and so on, we'd got a terrific strength to draw back on, which the more of us there were and the better organised we were, the more we could lean on. And it came in so useful that so useful. It was a community within a community, and it saved our sanity. It saved a lot of things, because I like to think that not only were we rescued from being mere numbers and ciphers, degraded into something that the Germans could push around and work in parties and feed if they felt like it, and kick around if they felt like it, but we became a unit which the Germans themselves respected. That's why there's a very sarcastic poem in that little booklet you had. Oh, we are the Berlin boys, you know, not ordinary blokes like you. But that isn't written the way it sounds. It's pure irony, because we found later on that when we talked about this fantastic community that we built up within the camp, remember there's 1,100 of us, that other blokes in smaller working parties that hadn't achieved the same standard, they couldn't understand it. They thought we were just shooting our mouths off for the sake of it. I suppose we were, but we were proud of having formed a community that we could turn to. We were no longer alone. We weren't fighting one against the other all the while for survival. We sort of sank or swam together. We were a unit, and 1,100 men's a big unit.
You said when we were talking at your house on Saturday nights, something that I made an impression on me, that about being a prisoner. that it was an experience that you hadn't had before or after in civilian life. Can you remember what you said?
The feeling that I see now as I look back is something that I hadn't had before. The nearest, I think, was if you go to church, you've got a feeling of purpose, a unity of purpose. You're all there for the same reason. And there are odd moments in church where you can really hit the heights. You know, you've got a feeling of oneness with the entire community, as it were, the entire congregation. Well, it was by no means religious, but within that community, I don't think that there were any backsliders. Of course, there were lazy people and so on, but I mean backsliders in the sense that people that were pessimists and always running England down. I mean, you get that now. England isn't a place to be right now. It's unfashionable to be patriotic. But we've got nobody that I can honestly think of that would have been accused of cooperating with the Germans or doing anything that would not be found, you know, in... let's see, how do I put this? We felt a unity of purpose in as much as we wanted to see the war over. If we could see any way of doing it by sabotage, by propaganda, by anything else, we were an 1,100-man unit that would go all out to do it. Whether it was just shouting at the guards for hitting somebody, or getting up petitions, or refusing to eat. Now, the Germans couldn't understand that, but if we felt that we got a grievance, it wasn't a hunger strike, we just straightforward refused to eat, and the cookhouse is suddenly left with 1,100 rations on its hands and didn't know what the hell to do with them. Whether it's potato soup or what it is, it's still a hell of a lot of rations. And we found out that as long as we were together, the Germans, they didn't know how to handle us, and they ended up sending in people to say, well, let us have a talk with your spokesman. We'd got a feeling, and of course the more victories we won in that respect, the more cocky we got. And we were making impossible, on retrospect, demands that we got away with. Mm. Like we wanted rest days, and we got them. Mm-hmm. We wanted musical instruments, and we got them. It sounds incredible, but 3 dance bands takes a lot of instruments. We've got saxophones, a lot, you know, dance bands, that era dance band type of thing. And we got 2 grand pianos. Mm-hmm. And we got it because, as a working party, we were entitled to Lagergeld, which was very few marks per day. Nobody ever spent it. They all turned it into the treasurer of the camp, who then turned it over to the Germans and said, here's 20,000 marks, go and buy us some instruments. We got boxing teams, football teams, a lot. Simply because we pulled together. I think we were drunk with power, if the truth were known. Where other camps might have had little things organised, we had a big camp, and by sticking together we found out there was virtually nothing that we couldn't do within our own community.
So you don't look on the black side of it, as having been a prisoner now, you feel that being a prisoner has taught you something?
I'm sorry, if I look on the black side, or
I mean, I noticed yesterday, you don't like to look on the black side
of
what it meant, but...
I don't like to look on the black side. Obviously there was a black side. I mean, war's war, and it's a dirty business, it's organised butchery. It isn't a game that youngsters think it is. But prisoners of war, we were in a rather privileged position in a way. We'd been almost immediately, on Crete even, registered as prisoners of war with the Swiss Red Cross, the International Red Cross. We knew we were registered because the Red Cross representative had been on the island and more or less insisted on documentation. So that we knew we weren't entirely lost. But Russians, who were treated like animals, less than animals. Animals were valuable, they were a source of food, a source of labour and so on. Russians were just something that they could vent their hate on. Jews, well, he asked me whether or not I'd been in contact with any extermination camps. We were sent to one camp as punishment for rioting. That's how cocky we were. We were rioting in a transit camp. They broke us up, shoved us in a transit camp. And of course, we being the old boys, 2.5 years in Berlin, we were going to show the other prisoners just how far you could go with Germans. And I'm afraid we kicked up a hell of a lot of fuss. As punishment, they ordered us on a 10-mile march to another camp called Jakobstal. When we got there, a bit worn and weary and battered, but undaunted, we found that it was a horrible dump, a sort of camp, very gloomy and very crowded and very dilapidated, where it was completely deserted, but it got an enormous mound at the bottom, like a potato clamp. And nobody took any notice of it until I asked one of the guards. I said, what the devil's that there? Is it a potato or turnip clamp? He says, oh no, this was a Jewish camp and there they are. So I was in the camp where they'd been exterminated, and they just casually sort of bulldozed them into a heap and then piled up the soil over them. And that's the nearest I got to an extermination camp. I was in one. But I didn't see any extermination as such. But, oh God, if you want degradation, I thought.
You remember you heard about something about the people who were prisoners of the Japanese? You were saying last night, yeah.
Well, as
that
I
made
say,
you feel different.
I'd got to be. I found that I couldn't sort of go on about my own experiences, because after all, I was back in England. I was fairly healthy. I came out with a gastric ulcer, but I still got both arms, both legs, and most of my equipment. And people naturally asked me how I'd gone on and what it was like, and was it very bad. And I always used to give them flippant, facetious answers. For instance, well, how can you compress 4 years and casual conversation? And I used to tell them all the funny bits, and there were a lot of funny bits. We used to make our own humour, but funny things did happen. And I used to tell them all the funny bits, and occasionally, but very occasionally, give them something really horrible to shut them up, because then they seemed to be quite happy if you gave them something horrific. That's what they expected, and they were satisfied. But we, at least, were fed regularly. Most of us that were registered prisoners got home, and we got home in one piece and reasonably sane and reasonably healthy. The Japanese prisoners, they've been in jungle warfare, they've been in jungle camps, and they've been treated like dirt by the Japs. They'd been knocked about, they'd had tropical diseases, and they were in appalling conditions, and they came back shells of men. I'm not exaggerating. If you see a Japanese prisoner and he weighs more than 10 stone, he's got something wrong with his glands, but they go hollow inside. The dysentery, malaria, you name it, they've had it. In fact, they used to shave the heads off, they used to beat them, they used to put them in the hot cages and the ovens. They had to bow to every NCO that cared to walk past them. They were put on terrifically hard labour on very poor rations, and then their lives weren't worth anything, because the Japanese themselves didn't value life. So it just struck me that I was one of the lucky ones.
Tell me about that picture that you painted. I mean, You said that it was inspired by something that you'd seen.
Well, we were already pretty down and out in a lot of ways, because whatever sort of community you build up amongst yourselves, it'll take one thing to sort of bring you back to earth with a bump, and that's a letter from home. If it's a good letter, you go around like a dog with two tails. But only too often it was bad news. After all, there were Cockneys there whose families were killed in the blitzing on London while we were away. The blitzes were stopped, and then the V1s started, and then the V2s started, and then there were the inevitable "Dear John" letters. "Dear John, I've met another man. Dear John, I'm having a baby by another man. Dear John, I've married somebody else." They were inevitable ones. And at times like that, whatever facade or shell you'd built up to protect yourself from the outside world got through the chinks and hit you hard. And on times like that, well, full-grown men just folded up. They got over it. Some of it got over it a bit better than others. Others moped for a few months until we sort of kicked them out of it, or events kicked them out of it. After all, you can't sort of mopes around going pale and wan like the ghosts if you've just had your camp blasted about your ears and you're ordered to move on, that sort of thing. And pastures new, it breaks this thread.
There was one thing you told me that finally that you were saying about you'd never met any society quite like the prison camp. That was the phrase. I'm just remembering the speech that you made to me in between the Saturday Western the other night about pretense. Do you remember?
There is no room for pretense in a prisoner of war camp. You work with them, you sleep with them, you shower bath with them, you go to the toilet with them, you live with them, you breathe with them. After a while, you know what they're going to say before they say it. There's no pretense. It's stripped right down. You know, by a raise of an eyebrow. You develop a level. The level being, there's a certain standard of behaviour expected of you. If you don't reach it, then you are sort of booted up to that level, or you're derided or ridiculed until you reach it. If you're big-headed, you're sort of punctured and deflated, you're brought down to the level. As I say, there were intelligent, cultured people from all sorts of walks. There was teachers, there was graduates, there was college men, there was cinema organist. But there was no hierarchy of any sort. We sort of struck a level. I honestly believe that we even struck a particular level of language, that is to say, accent. We found out that if I, for instance, spoke broad pottery, I'd got to repeat myself 2 or 3 times before anyone understood me. In the same camp there'd be an Aussie, New Zealander, Scotty, and so on. Well, we developed a peculiar sing-song accent, dialect, a language.
Can you still speak in it?
No, I don't pretend to, because I didn't realise I'd got it until I came home and found out that I spoke entirely different from my own family. And people were asking me that didn't know me whether or not I was an American. You've got to enunciate clearly, you've got to be careful what you said, and you've got to use set phrases for certain things. Otherwise, they didn't understand you. If I can give you one little illustration, talking of dialect, I was sitting down, propped up against the barrack one day, and a Black Watch soldier went past. In the camp, Black Watch soldier went past, and the Londoner sitting by me said, "You know," he said, "I thought I knew most dialects." He said, "But that fellow must come from the Outer Hebrides or somewhere. He's got the broadest Scotch dialect I've ever heard in my life, and I don't understand a word of it." And I looked at him in sheer astonishment. I said, that particular chap comes from Fenton, about 2 miles from where I live, and he's talking pottery. And he wouldn't believe me, but it's true, the story is.
Mm-hmm.
The pottery dialect is so outlandish that he thought he was out of Hebrides.
You're saying also something about how it revealed certain kinds of qualities in men, surprisingly. Do you remember?
Well,
You talked about, courage in certain people.
well,
Being rather unexpected.
it was unexpected. On looking back, it was really marvellous. But it was unexpected in a lot of ways, because the people I detested as a serving soldier, as it were, not knowing them except under those conditions, drinking, swearing, womanising type men, and you may have found that I'm a bit sparse on the songs that you wanted. I never really liked them. I never really joined in them. I knew them, but although I heard as much as anybody else, I deliberately wouldn't register them in my mind, so I'm not really much help to you there. But I'm no Puritan, but it seemed to me felt for the sake of it, drunkenness for the sake of it. They wallowed in it, they enjoyed fighting, they enjoyed being sick, they enjoyed everything that went with it, coarseness. And I'd seen those same men that I hated in the prison camp, and I did hate them. I'd seen them without the drink, without the womanising, with the same bad language and probably exactly the same character traits. They were the people that maintained the morale of a particular barrack room. They were the ones with the stories and the laugh when everything was going to pot.
Mm-hmm.
They were the ones that could come up with some remark. They were the ones that were cheeky on parade when the German officer had just ordered them to shut up or he'd stop all the rations. They were the ones that came up trumps. They're the ones you think about when you look back. And I think that particular note that that order that I ripped off the camp notice board that you saw about a Lancashire fellow, he was so quiet that everybody called him Gandhi. They thought he was contemplating his navel. He all used to sit in a corner and sort of gaze into the middle distance, and you couldn't reach him at all. I made a rather special friend of him for various reasons, which are unimportant here. But he was a bit on the sickly side. He was very, very thin, and very weak, very pale, sunken face. I suppose we all were, but he seemed to be exceptional. And he was so skinny that he fitted the part of Gandhi perfectly. He was sent out eventually after he seemed to be fit on a work party, and he took umbrage at being pushed around by the gang who thought he wasn't pushing his shovel hard enough. He dropped his shovel, and the same meek and mild bloke that wouldn't say boo to a goose, and smiled whenever you spoke to him, but didn't answer. He calmly punched this ganger straight in the face and ended up in Clinks in solitary confinement. And it was an act of quiet heroism, because he could have been really clobbered for that. Actually, they were sending him to heavy labour parties for less punishment, less infringements of the laws and that. But for instance, there was a Welshman. He was a boxer in the army, and rather punch drunk, we thought. He was one of the type I'm telling you of. Yeah, I hated his guts when I knew him, before the camp life. We got hit by a 1,000-pounder bomb. It was a big one anyway. And we were in the slip trenches at the end of the barracks, and the barracks collapsed. And it was just a heap of firewood and everything in it. This particular bloke, a Welshman, it was all smoke, bits falling, burning, searchlights, the racket that was falling, and we were all frightened out of our wits. he suddenly shot up from where everybody was crouching, him including, in the corner, and by Christ, my piano accordion, and he rocketed out into all the fucking whistling shrapnel and all everything else. He got right dramatic background, and burrowed under the planks like a flipping terrier after a bone. And of course we called him 7 different sorts of tough sod, but he went nevertheless, and he emerged about 5 minutes later, triumphantly clutching his piano accordion, you see. Well, I mean, heroism as such, it didn't achieve anything, but it didn't want to boost to our morale as a bloke do such a stupid thing at a time like that when we were all anxious to get our heads down and get out of it all. But, oh dear. What do you say?
Well, that was great.
The rider that we were using obscene songs anyway, and waving me and Jack in Germany. I suppose we did a share in a way, but it wasn't quite so brash or hearty, or we were people. We were sensitive. We were up. We were down. We were like you, like every youngster of 18 to 20 to 30. Get the cross section out of the community right now, and you could do the same all over again under the same circumstances. I think that this spirit that I mentioned once before, I gave it some thought because I couldn't define it, and the best thing I could come up with was we found out that we needed each other, and because the need was so great, we turned to each other more, and there's nothing like the feeling of being wanted. That's probably something, it's certainly something I've never put into words before. There's probably something you'll never hear any other ex-serviceman, prisoner of war say, but I'm sure it's true. We needed each other. We were on our own. There was nothing except a tenuous thread of Red Cross parcels and mail from home between us and oblivion, because to the Germans we were numbers. Their aim was degradation, depersonalisation, and regimentation. And in sheer self-defence we turned to each other to become people again. And I was lucky enough to be in a camp where we succeeded, and I think brilliantly. We found that we had got something to give one another. As much as we needed one another, we'd got something to give. And it paid off. I think that's why I've come away with an impression that I found a spirit there that I've never found anywhere else. Because back in civilian life, people don't need you so much. You don't need other people so much. And peacetime has got its drawbacks in as much as you're not up against it. You don't get right down to basics. The basics of life, which is the will to survive, the will to be something, not just nothing. You can buy something, and a personality, an entity. I suppose that some people have got it more than others, but it's not universal. In the camp it was universal, and the feeling of oneness made it a force that was something you could feel, something to be reckoned with. And if that ain't a definition, I've had it, because that's what I came up with after just sitting down and wondering to myself, oh, was I just waffling on, or was there something there? And I'm convinced there was. There was something there that was pretty unique.
In prison camp.
In prison camp. We've got to turn to something, or be nothing. It's just something that the human spirit rebels against. You can't be nothing. You've got to assert yourself. You're being untrue to your own instincts unless you do. And I think that we found the formula almost instinctively. We turned to each other. We got together. We pooled our resources of spirit, hope, whatever else you could call it. We knew one another inside out. We could almost say for someone else what they were going to say before they said it. But it didn't matter. I think that was an example of how close we were. I suppose it's the closeness that you can achieve in marriage. But there was something there. We were young. We were still hopeful. And we just wanted to survive. But we didn't want to just jog along till something happened. We wanted to make something of ourselves. And we created our own community within the camp. We didn't sit down and form committees. It happened. We talked, we found we'd got things in common. We found that we'd still got not only plenty to live for, but plenty to do. And I don't mean just to pass the time. We found out that possibly within the camp itself we were of more use to the Allied war effort than we'd ever been outside with a gun in our hands. Because a gun is just a means to an end. And before you can point it in any direction, it's got to have some purpose behind it. So that if you worked on men's minds, you were doing more good than firing a bullet at them. And I like to think that we definitely influenced every German we ever came in contact with by not only what we said, but our bearing, our conduct in the face of hardship, privation, by being what we were. And the Germans, nothing else. They do respect discipline, someone that's got a pride in themselves. If you're conscientious, clean, punctual, and amongst other things, disciplined, the Germans quite respect you. And it's perfectly true to say that we actually got some of the guards, our own German guards, in trouble because the visiting officers thought that they looked a disgrace alongside the British prisoners inside the wire. And that's more or less one of our contributions, which I still like to think played its part. Well, I've been waffling on for quite a while now.
Reg, you mentioned earlier on about the Red Cross parcels. Were you ever hungry at all?
I was hungry for 4 years.
What is it like to be hungry?
What's it like to be hungry? What's it like to be cold? What's it like to be wet? What's it like to be frightened? What's it like to be absolutely desolate and lonely? What's it like to be hungry? God, signs of the times. I was hungry before I joined the army. I've got a father who's a coal miner, 6 kids to feed. To be hungry. Ah, well, if you want an analysis of it. First of all, you get a pain. You get a pain around about the time when you should have a meal. And the pain goes off. And then you find that you can manage without food, and you can go on. You go into the second day, perhaps 2 days without food. And still food won't actually bother you. You find that by sheer willpower you can convince yourself that you don't really need it. You know you're not going to get it anyway, so you might just as well cooperate. Then you'll find that you can't stop thinking about food. You get actual memories which are almost playbacks of flavours and aromas. It's on your mind, and wherever you look, it reminds you of something. Whether it's something that you had in the army, or something your mother's cooking, or it's not there. I mean, you don't walk past somewhere and there's a smell of something. It just comes to you in your memory, and you get a playback of all these marvellous things, so that you find yourself almost exclusively devoting your thoughts and your conversation to food. And under those circumstances, when there's a group of you and you're all hungry, you get the most captivated audience you could ever wish for, simply by working your way through your favourite menu. But after a while you find that you're going weaker, and you know you're going weaker because if you've been sitting for any length of time and you get up suddenly, you go dizzy. You find, as I did on working parties, that your shovel's getting heavier and your pick's getting heavier and you're getting slower. The worst part of all is if you happen to have anything wrong with you. I mean, obviously prisoners of war, some of them were still suffering from wounds, and wounds. And under the circumstances they've been living for quite a while, they collected other ailments, diseases, malaria, dysentery, and I'm afraid in the camp that I was in, they've got infantile paralysis, typhoid, we've got various things. We've got the usual insect satellites that are most unpleasant. We were infested, and they brought a train of diseases and ailments with them. Beriberi and jaundice. Well, if you're hungry, everything is worse. If you've got a cut in your hand and you're hungry, you've already got the cut and you've got hunger plus, which magnifies it. But hunger, it's very, very real and it's very basic. I don't often think about it now, but it is one of the basics of life, and as a prisoner of war you're down to basics. So that we always used to say, first of all, I want to fill my belly, then I want to sleep, and then I want a woman. And those are the 3 rules that we decided were about the most basic you could get. But, however long you could go without food, I think the longest I ever went was 4 days. it only wants someone talking about it, or a smell of something, whether it's a raw apple or something, a whiff of cooking from somewhere, to bring back the pain, because you can manage without food for a long period, but the pain in your stomach is like a knife when you start dwell on the subject at all. I mean, you can't do without it as long as you don't see it, smell it, or hear about it. But it's a matter of mind over matter, I think. How long you can actually go up to starvation point, I don't honestly know. 4 days, I think, as a sort of test without pushing it to its limits. I don't know. There were camps by us with political prisoners in, where they actually did starve to the point of collapse. And of course they did die when the cold weather and other things. It didn't starvation itself that killed them. They immediately developed pneumonia, bronchitis and every other ailment under the sun which killed them. But they starved to the point of collapse in these other camps. We were lucky. Well, lucky because we were still getting the occasional Red Cross parcel through, and we were kept strong enough to work, which meant that we got an extra ration of food. Their rule was, if you want to eat, you've got to work.
Can I?
And, they did keep in touch as much as they could. I knew I could rely on them. If it was possible for letters to get through, or parcels to get through, they'd be there. If they weren't there, it wasn't their fault. Either the ship had gone down, the Germans had stolen them, or there'd been a fire. If it was possible at all for any contact with home to get through, it was there. I knew I could rely on them at home. And that was an anchor that I never questioned. It never crossed my mind. I knew it would be there. I expected it to be there. And if it wasn't there, it wasn't their fault.
So you never actually dreamed about it?
So that I never dwelt on it to the extent that it played on my mind. And I thought, I could get visions. Of course, I mean, I could memorise things, and I'd got my own picture of the folk back home and the places back home. But no, I didn't dream of home. My dreams were nightmares of the fighting. Because home was an anchor, but the fighting was an impression that played on my mind, and it motivated me. I was in a situation where I was dealing with viciousness, brutality, you name it and we've got it. And that was on my mind. That's what I've got to cope with every day. I wasn't beaten every day, I wasn't starved every day, or tortured. But the possibility was always there. And sudden death was something that you wondered when your turn was coming next. And for you the war is over is the sort of thing that the Germans said, and it didn't mean a damn thing. For us, the war had begun in a different way. We hadn't got out of the bombs and the bullets and the shells and the fighting and the death and the fire. We were going right into it. I was in Berlin, and a 500 bomber raid's got to be seen to be believed. I mean, 10,000 anti-aircraft guns puts the fear of God into you, or whatever else you believe in. I was a young kid. I don't care. I stopped growing at the age of 18, 19. as far as civilization's concerned, and I started absorbing brutality and death and all the basics. And the war came to us. I've sat in a slit trench at the back of a camp on my birthday, and I've looked up at the night sky, and it was as bright as day with searchlights and star shells and the most fantastic firework display you've ever seen in your life. The vibration from the guns, the shaking the barracks to pieces. The roar of a gun is one bang. The roar of 10,000 guns is one continuous roar that was going on for 2 hours. And that's what we was experienced at the time. And I've sat in the slit trench listening to the whining of shrapnel coming down, because what goes up from anti-aircraft guns comes down in bits, red hot bits. And I've counted 27 of our bombers coming down in flames, which I thought was the sort of birthday present that I could never forget. And the next morning we stepped over the wreckage of the bombers and the charred remains of the crew. So, where is the war over business? It was brought to us just as hard, only all the adventure had gone out of it. We went into it as young boys playing a game. The war finished as organised butchery by experts. Not just experts, by big business. The big business rolled out the munitions and the industries. They rolled out the necessities for it, and they trained ordinary citizens to become expert killers. And they made sure that it was organised down to the last bit of butchery, the last bit of horror. So the game was over, and we pitchforked into Germany, and then began the real systematic hell of it all. And if ever you want somebody that's pacifist, you're talking to the right one now. If I had my... Well, I'll give you an example. Before the war, I was just a kid. There's nothing I loved better than air rifles, pistols, and anything you could shoot. After the war, if my kid picked a gun up of any sort, he was more likely to get a clip round the ear than a sixpence for a roll of caps. And I can't abide anybody throwing stones or sticks and anything, because every little bit of it has the same sort of tendency that culminates in mass destruction. That sounds ridiculous. People in psychology still say, let them work off their aggressive instincts. But I say, guns, anything that will injure or harm people, they are only made for one purpose, and eventually they'll be used for that purpose. And if enough people use them, you get the sort of butchery and horrors of war that culminate in the holocausts that we've already been through. Anyway, he's got me at it again. For Christ's sake, say something and stop me.
Sorry, this was after you were released? Yeah.
Must have been 20 prisoners bunched round a fleishery almost, had a butcher's door in the town, and they were hammering on the door, and they were armed to the teeth. We picked them up off dead bodies and take them off Germans and all sorts. Armed to the teeth, and there must have been 20 of them. And it was barred, you know, they've got shutters on most continental shops and houses. It was barred and shuttered up and everything. But I fell on this shop door, and I sort of, I was only going past, and I heard somebody shouting above it all, Tommy, Tommy, ever put anything in Cork, it was a Tommy on in Winship Road. And I looked up, and there's a red-faced, round-faced bloke hanging out of the upstairs window. And he was saying, can you move them? They'll kill me, they'll smash the shop down, they'll rob me, they'll set fire to the place. Because they were armed to the teeth and a terrifying bunch. And to my astonishment, I remember I was only a kid, about 23, the entire gang of Russians turned down and stopped what they were doing and eyed me up expectantly. And you know, they must have thought I was an officer. I wasn't an officer, I was a gunner, an ordinary gunner. And they must have thought that I'd got some rank, some pull or something. And this German is howling out the window. So, you may think these conversations are odd, but at the time, I could speak enough German to get by. You know, I had been a prisoner for 4 years. And I went up like, oh, there isn't much I can do. What do you expect me to do? He said, well, look, he said that they can have food out of the shop, but I've got a wife and 2 daughters I've got. He says, and I'm frightened they'll smash the shop up and they'll set fire to it and kill us all. He says, no, me poor daughters. So I thought, look, I said, if I come in now, he said, I want you to hand me out as much of your food as you've got. Oh yeah, yeah. Downstairs he came, opened the door, the Russian stood there waiting. I hadn't even got ammunition in this tin pot revolver I'd got tucked in my belt. And they were always big, if not bigger than me. 20 of them, armed to the teeth. And they casually stood aside while the German unbolted the door, and I went in, and this German butcher handed me every mortal German sausage and liverwurst and everything else he got in his shop. Well, everything I could see anyway, to these Russians. And then I went out, and he bolted the door after me, and the Russians went away.
That was it.
I was the start. I couldn't do a thing wrong that day. Well, I did, I never got a car. I went back to the work, didn't fire anything. People said it was brand new, only done 300 kilometres on the spot. And the beauty of it all is I couldn't drive.
You had no license?
I'd never even been trained to drive. You know, in the army they do train drivers. Well, I wasn't a driver. I was a signaller, and I was a ammunition number on a anti-aircraft gun. But I'd never done driving. And
How did you manage?
Oh, I knew that what you did was press the clutch, change the gear, and then things happened if you pressed on the accelerator. And you know, I found a really big fire engine. If you got escape ladders, if you got the turntable at the back, if you got hose pipes, if you got smoke, you know, breathing equipment, if you got ladders, hook, axes, every mortal thing on.
You say you could speak German.
I
Or you
learned
could
all the
speak-
swear words first.
You learned all the swear words first. You used to make up a song, Gargan England.
Wir fahren gegen England, we must against England. If I sang that song now, I should be manufacturing a lot of it. We made it up as we went along when we were in the camps.
How would you make it up? What would it? Would you have to have an incident to make it up too?
Circumstances, environment, it's all happened on the spur of the moment. If we wanted to be insulting,
To the Germans?
we'd pick on a particular garden. He'd end up in the song, you see, and we'd make sure he knew about it. When we got him good and riled, we'd sort of lay off sharpish before we started put him on up the spout.
Could you manufacture one now? Could you give me an example?
I'd rather not, because it's, to me right now, it's artificial. It's not got the spontaneity it had then. Oh, I'm sorry if it's put you in a spot,
No.
but I suppose I've matured. I haven't got the razor sharp wit and reaction that I had then. and it wasn't all my own anyway, but you get the right cross-section and you get Geordie humour, Scouse humour, Yorkshire. It's got their own type of humour. No, it wouldn't ring true to me. You may have heard me say in the pub, you could tell them any old yarn and they'd have to believe it. I wouldn't do that, I couldn't. If I can't tell the truth, I don't want to say anything, because I'd be letting down myself and then the lads that didn't get back. There's no need for lies. The truth will stand on its own. And the truth's something that has got to emerge from it. Otherwise the whole business would pointless. I think that's the word I'm looking for. No, I'd rather not try and
No, that's
manufacture.
fine. Thank you very much.